Good afternoon. My name is Clive Richardson, the Chairman of Albion Technology and General VCT PLC. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the company's annual general meeting. Alongside me today are my fellow directors, Margaret Payne, who is the Audit and Risk Committee Chair and Senior Independent Director, Patrick Reeve, and I'm pleased to welcome David Bender and Peter Morehouse, both of whom were appointed to the board in 2023. Also present is Will Fraser-Allen, the Managing Partner of Albion Capital, the company's investment manager. He will shortly give a presentation on the results of the company for the year ended 31st of December 2023. Moving on to the formal business, the quorum for the AGM is 2 members entitled to vote in person or by proxy. I can confirm this has been met, and therefore I declare this AGM open. The notice of the meeting has been in your hands for the statutory period, so I will take that notice as read. Due to the success of the previous year's virtual AGMs and to maximise engagement with shareholders, the board have again arranged for the Lumi team to broadcast this year's AGM using its online platform, which enables members to interact fully, including taking part in a question and answer session and voting on the board's proposed resolutions. Before I hand over to Will for his presentation, I would just like to explain how the voting process will work. But let me first state that if you've already submitted a proxy vote to the registrar, you don't need to vote again, unless, of course, you wish to change your vote. The resolutions will be voted by way of a poll. The votes received under this process will be added to the proxy votes that have already been received and verified by your independent registrar, Computershare. Once I declare the poll open on the Lumi platform, a list of resolutions will automatically appear on your screen. Please select the option that corresponds with how you want to vote, and the option will change colour and a confirmation message will appear to indicate your vote has been cast and received. To vote on all resolutions display, select the Vote All option at the top of the screen. If you want to change your vote, you have the option to reselect your choice. Should you have any questions on the voting procedure, please send them through the platform and someone in the Albion team will respond promptly. So thank you, and I now declare the poll open. So now turning to the main business of the AGM, following the manager's presentation, the directors and the manager will take questions from members on the company's financial results and proposed AGM resolutions. I'd like to thank those members who've already submitted their questions and queries through to the chairman's email address. If you wish to ask questions, please select the messaging icon from within the navigation bar and type your question at the top of the screen. Click on the arrow icon to the right of the text box to submit your question. And please, if you could do that as soon as possible so that it reaches us ahead of that section. So thank you again, and I will now hand over to Will Fraser-Allen for his presentation.
Clive, thank you very much indeed. So a huge welcome to all our shareholders to today's AGM presentation, where I'm going to be talking you all through the results for the year to 31 December 2023. So if we move on to the next slide and the next one, I'll basically be taking you through the results for the year, and then I'll be also looking at some of the highlights and which drove some of that financial performance. I've been giving you a bit of a feel for where the portfolio is currently positioned and those companies that we have added to it. As usual, we will have made some realizations, and I'll just talk a bit more generally about our approach to investment strategy and ESG. We have just released the IMS statement to the RNS, which will allow me to give you an update on the results for the first quarter of the year, which are now announced to the market. So if we move to the next slide. 2023 was quite a challenging year generally. So in that context, I'm pleased to report that we did deliver a positive return for the year of 3.83%. That is below our target dividend ambition of 5%, but I think in the context of really quite a challenging year for young technology and healthcare companies, I think it feels like a credible results, and I'll talk more about what has driven that. NAV at the end of the year was 71.99p, and that brings our total shareholder value return, so since inception, to a smidgen under £2 at 199.33. In line with our dividend policy, which by way of a reminder is to pay approximately 5% of NAV, and within that context, we paid 3.72p of dividend. So if we move to the next slide, it's worth setting out the background in which these results. So I feel like every year I speak to this group, I continue to talk about uncertainty in the world, and that didn't change this year, and indeed hasn't changed now. So we did have quite a tricky macroeconomic time, and that did feed through to some challenges for some of our companies, but by no means all. But also we continue to have significant geopolitical uncertainty, not only with the war in Ukraine, but also the situation in Gaza. That said, the portfolio is positioned to mostly in software and mission critical software, and we've chosen that as an area because we believe that will be more resilient in times of economic stress, and that specifically is around avoiding consumer-facing businesses, which tend to be more prone to underlying economic cycles. Inflation is falling, but interest rates have remained high. But I think the view is that they will fall this year, which sets us up for, I hope, a better year this year. And in that context, I will be reporting continued positive performance in the first quarter. So if we move to the next slide, we can look at that track record, the performance data behind our track record in a bit more detail. And what that's showing is, as I've highlighted, a year where we didn't get to that 5% target. We are there on a 3-year basis. We're there on a 5-year basis, but not currently on a 10-year basis. So there's more to do. But hopefully what this slide shows is that in more recent times, barring the last 12 months, we are meeting that target. So if we move on to the next slide, it's worth just looking at what were the main highlights. In terms of fundraising, in terms of growing the assets of the VCT, we raised 10.1 million in the year. This is slightly skewed by the previous year, which actually had 2 fundraisings in it, and that was because we changed the timing of the launch of our fundraising from historically in September to a January launch. So it's really a timing issue rather than anything else. But the important point being, we raise the amount each year that we believe is the right amount for the company to raise, taking into account the calls on cash, which is things like fundraising, so things like new investing, supporting the portfolio, buybacks, and dividends. The M&A market generally was somewhat subdued in 2023. That's been well reported. We weren't immune to that. So you see that our realization from the exits was quite sharply down. However, we did generate just under 6 million of returns. That was predominantly the sale of Offerlos and the part disposal of Quantexa. And I talk a bit more about Quantexa later in the presentation. Investment rate was also down, and this really is just the picture of 2023 being a year where activity generally was somewhat lower. So that said, we did invest in 5 new companies, and we did continue to support the existing portfolio. Share buybacks very consistent year on year, and dividends are in line with that 5% target. So if we move to the next slide, we can break down the sort of key movements in terms of portfolio valuation moves. The big one here was Quantexa, which is our largest investment in the portfolio, and that did a fundraise during 2023, which was supported by Singapore Wealth Fund GIC, and that gave rise to a valuation of over £1 billion, a corresponding write-up for this fund. Radnor House, which we independently value each year, saw its valuation tick up as a result of increasing pupil numbers. But against that, we And as you would expect in a venture portfolio, we did have challenges too, and Black Swan saw some very challenging trading during the year. The Shonay River Hydro features on this slide, and that's one of our hydro renewable energy assets, and that was linked to increasing evidence from generating data that the long-term potential for that particular asset was lower than we had expected. So we've effectively re-evaluated our cash flow expectations, which has given rise to a reduction. But at least now we can be comfortable that our valuation is more closely aligned to the data that is now available to be more accurate. And then elsewhere of the portfolio, there were a number of write-ups and write-downs. There are a few mentioned on this slide. And if you want to look at the detail of that, there is a full breakdown of the movements in the portfolio in the annual report. So if we move to the next slide. The portfolio is very much doing what we would expect it to be. So its core focus is around healthcare and software, with a little bit of renewable energy assets, which we are expecting to hold for the long term, and then sitting at about 22% of cash, which ensures that the fund is well positioned to make new investments. Portfolio at aggregate now is 60 odd companies, and that's employing just under 5,000 people across the UK. So very much performing that function of creating innovative companies that typically employ highly skilled people in the UK. If we move to the next slide, we can look at the portfolio through the lens of its maturity. So to what extent is a company represented by larger companies rather than smaller, the larger companies in theory being less volatile than the younger ones. And we look at this in sort of two ways. We look at it in terms of revenues, which gives a sense of scale, but also employees, which does the same. And what this continues to show you is that whilst many of our new investments are made in early stage companies, because the ambition is that those become more mature over time, when you look at the portfolio by value, the actual exposure is to larger companies. And the chart on the left shows that over 76% of the portfolio by value is now in companies with revenues over 5 million that we've described as companies scaling up. And if you look at it in terms of employees, 60% employ more than 100 people. So it is a portfolio which has a range of maturities within it, but clearly investing in those young companies is absolutely crucial to the role that VCTs play generally and to how we create value over time. So if we move to the next slide, I'm always keen to show the top three companies in the portfolio, because if we are doing our job, we will get the outlier companies, the successful companies that will become larger relative to the rest of the portfolio. And that is because we know that delivering top quartile performance in a venture portfolio, it is very driven by those outlier returns. So we've got Quantexa in particular, which is our data analytics business, helping, for example, large banks to detect financial crime. We've got Provica, which is our children's medicines business, which has made good progress in the years, now got a second drug on the market. And what we're now seeing is a really interesting pipeline of drugs coming through. And this is a company that's selling those pediatric medicines across Europe. And then this company also has an exposure to our school, Radnor House in Sevenoaks, which, as I alluded to earlier, has seen growth in the year in pupil numbers, despite the obvious challenges from the potential VAT uplift that's coming through. It's a company that's trading well and to date has continued to grow its pupil numbers. So if I move to the next slide, I wanted to just touch on Quantexa, not only because it's the largest company, but because it was a big driver of value in the year. And this is a business we backed when it was effectively free revenue from software back in 2016. And we've now backed it through multiple rounds of funding as the business has seen its employees go from 30 to over 600. It's now operating from 14 offices around the world, and it is selling globally to not only to the large banks, but increasingly to other sectors, for example, healthcare. We had an opportunity in the year when there was a large Series E fundraising from GIC in Singapore to top slice our investments, and we took the opportunity to sell a small stake, around 3.4 million, and it was a useful exercise in that it generated a 10.3 times return, and was a good way of giving further comfort of the valuation of the remaining stake. It wasn't a view on the quality of the business. It's a very exciting business, but it was a sensible piece of housekeeping to trim our stake. But it is still the largest investment in our portfolio, and that, as we say here, that investment that the company raised was at a 1.4 billion pound valuation, and that was the first British unicorn of 2023, and that a unicorn being a company valued at over $1 billion. So a really exciting company that made some good progress. If we move to the next slide, I will touch on new investments, and the core of what we do is around B2B software, healthcare, particularly health tech, but also we are now in the early stages of building up a deep tech portfolio and also a portfolio of climate tech investments. And the 5 companies we did this year very much captures those approaches, in the sense that we've got Open Dialogue, which is an AI-powered chatbot. So that's allowing all businesses to potentially use AI in their interactions with their customers, which is an obvious place where AI can be very effective. And then if I pick Gridcog and Mondra together, they were both businesses very much in climate tech. Gridcog helps large enterprises manage their transition to net zero, particularly where they are creating distributed energy resources. So that might be wind turbines at factories, that might be solar panels on their roofs, that might be electric vehicle fleets, and these can be very complex over large global organizations, and they provide the modeling software and the monitoring software to do that. And then Mondra helps companies initially, mostly in the food sector, better understand the sustainability of their supply chains. So looking beyond their own businesses, but looking at the sustainability of those that sell product into their products. Photograph was very much in that deep tech, and this is the early steps in a deep tech strategy. But that was a very interesting company that is producing algorithms within the world of quantum computing, which is potentially an enormous area going forward, and will make a step change in how computers are used. Moving to the next slide. Following on investments into our existing portfolio is fundamental to what we do, supporting those companies as they succeed, helping them grow over time so that it creates the contexts of the future. And we invested in Panacea, which is our cybersecurity business, Pravica, which we've talked about, and then Runa and Gravity. So these are all companies that have real potential to become very significant businesses going forward. If we move to the next slide. Reminder of our strategy, which I've alluded to already, but we typically invest from seed and then continue to invest all the way through to Series B, and that might be Series B being a company that might be employing 200 odd people or even more. And we are very focused on those long-term trends of healthcare being an enduring theme and investment opportunity, and B2B software as more and more business digitalize their products, digitalize their processes. And it is very much B2B our focus. We avoid direct exposure to consumer-facing businesses. So if we move to the next slide, I'll touch on ESG. We continue to believe that backing long-term sustainable business is an important part to delivering long-term returns, and the types of business play to that point. But it's also about how do we help those companies and develop their own ESG strategies, not only because that's an important part of our investment thesis, but recognizing that ultimately we will be looking to exit sell those investments to large corporates who themselves will have sophisticated ESG strategies, and will expect those companies they acquire to similarly have ESG strategies. So that continues. We are increasingly measuring ESG across the portfolio, and as part of that, we report to industry bodies such as UN, PRI against our progress. But if we look on the next slide, we think about the ESG of Albion, the business, Albion, the fund manager, and we continue to work to reduce the carbon footprint of Albion. We look to do more in terms of social outreach, whether that's locally, whether that's helping students from lower social backgrounds get into VCs, VC as a career. But we also have a charitable endeavours, and WizKids is a charity that we've been supporting for some years. Governance is key to what we do. It's absolutely ingrained in running venture capital trusts, but it's also increasingly looking at how we can measure how ESG is actually operating in practice within our VCTs, and then making sure we report appropriately to you as shareholders in our annual reports, but also in our regular updates to your board when we meet quarterly. If we move to the next slide, please. So looking forward, what are the prospects? Clearly, we do still live in uncertain times, and I just feel like I'm a bit of a broken record, as I've been saying that for rather a long time, but it still applies. I think I look forward with more optimism. I do think that interest rates will come down. I do think we're seeing growth across the portfolio. So when we look at the early indication of revenue growth across the portfolio, that feels like it is going in the right direction in the first few months of this year. We will continue to do what we do, which is focusing on those mission critical products as a way of creating resilience, and we will continue to limit that exposure to consumers that I've been talking to. Importantly, the fund has cash to invest. We are seeing more opportunities this year than last year, but I do acknowledge that last year our investment level was low, but already even in the early months of this year, we are seeing a decent uptick in opportunities, and that really speaks to confidence. That speaks to the confidence that we see amongst entrepreneurs we back. Markets are feeling more buoyant, and that all feeds through to an easier environment for us to continue to build shareholder value for this fund. If I turn to the next slide, I just want to touch on electronic voting. So this is a topic that the board thinks about a lot. It's really important that our shareholders feel engaged in the activities of the VCT, and the most obvious way to do that is to vote in AGMs and other general meetings against the resolutions that are proposed by the board. And we've been doing some work around trying to make that as easy as possible. So those of you that are signed up to electronic communications, and many of you are, will now see that in the run-up to AGMs, you will be sent an email reminding you to vote, and trying to make that as easy as possible. So in that email, it will give you the link to where you can register your vote, but it also includes the information you need to do that, which is around shareholder numbers, and then the PIN specific to that vote. So I would encourage as many of you as possible to vote. It's an important part of that interaction between shareholders and their company. If you don't vote through that link, which is the easiest, you can still go directly to the voting website, which is on this slide. And as you heard from Clive, with the Lumi platform that this AGM is being presented on, you can vote in real time through the Lumi platform, when those votes will be aggregated with votes elsewhere. If you've got any questions, just please contact us. If you're having problems voting, we are keen to do what we can to make voting easier for you as a shareholder base. So thank you for that little plug. And if we move on to the next slide, we can talk about the first quarter, which has just been announced. So we did continue to make progress, relatively modest in the first quarter, but we increased NAV by 0.6%. So that's good. We are continuing to do virtual AGMs. We do encourage people to come to our annual shareholder seminar. That is a face-to-face physical seminar. It's a real opportunity for shareholders to interact with Albion, the manager, interact with your board, and importantly, have the opportunity to hear from some of our invested companies, listen to relevant talks to what we're doing around our investment strategy, and you will have the opportunity for me to present progress across all our VCTs over the last 12 months. So I would encourage people to put the 20th of November in their diaries and sign up through sending an email to info@albion.capital. It's a great event, and it's a real opportunity for us to engage with all of you. Just a quick reminder that we've announced dividends, 1.8p, and that is payable on the 28th of June in line with our 5% strategy. And just an update on the exposure of our top 3 investments following the revaluation of the portfolio in November. They now account for 26.6% of NAV. So it gives you a bit of a flavour. There is an announcement on the RNS if you would like to read more detail. So on that note, I'm going to be handing back to Clive for the Q&A. So I look forward to answering questions that he directs in my direction. Clive, over to you.
Thank you very much, Will. And as Will has pointed out, we're now going to do the Q&A sessions. And what I'm going to do is run through the questions that have come through and thank you for those people who have sent these questions. So the first question is, the new auditor, Johnson Carmichael, operates in Scotland but has a London office. Why are the directors satisfied the new firm can carry out the audit given the geographical difference? So absolutely right, Johnson Carmichael are predominantly based in Scotland. However, they do have an office in London, and the audit team come down on a regular basis to London to work with us. We went through a very thorough audit tender process to ensure the most suitable audit firm was appointed, which was Johnson Carmichael. They come down to our offices in London to carry out a substantial part of their audit work and are present at meetings whenever the board requires it. So I think we're very comfortable with Johnson Carmichael. Second question. Have the board taken full and proper account of the general fall in valuations of early stage companies in the venture capital industry? Now, Will obviously mentioned this a couple of times and referenced what is unquestionably a very challenging background. This is clearly very important to the board, as it is to Will and the management company. And I guess I'd make 2 observations. One is that as a board, we remain very encouraged by the progress being made by the portfolio companies. And secondly, you need to, and as a board, we need to look at the long term, and that's just the very nature of venture capital companies. So we have to take a long-term perspective. Next question. And again, we'll refer to this as well, which is, why are all the meetings virtual? Now we're back to normal and not needing to observe pandemic rules. So I think the reality is the Lumai platform does allow a wider shareholder engagement. We've spoken to lots of shareholders and we've received very positive feedback. And in fact, in 22, we held a hybrid AGM, which was both in person and virtual. The in-person attendance was less than 5 shareholders, and the vast majority clearly viewed the live broadcast or the recorded video that was uploaded after the meeting. And then I just want to reiterate what Will said, which is there is a physical annual shareholder seminar every year. It's, I've been myself, as the rest of the board, just as Will did, I strongly recommend it. It's full of interesting presentations made by investee companies and the management team. This year's seminar is scheduled for the 20th of November. It's always fully subscribed, so please, as Will suggested, if you're interested, please reserve a place as soon as possible. So we had a couple of other questions which merit longer responses. So, in fact, I am going to what I'm going to do actually. Well, I'll do one of them now, and I'm just going to ask Will that it's in what instruments does the company keep its uninvested cash? Just come through.
Right. Great. Yes. So basically, we have a very clear policy that cash is held in financial institutions which have at least an A rating under Moody's and S&P. The vast majority of that is in deposit accounts. There is a requirement under the regulations that we cannot hold cash in accounts with a notice period greater than 1 week. So by definition, our cash is all available on 1 week. It's all in institutions that are rated A. A small amount of our cash is invested in effectively underlying 1 week notes, which are themselves issued by grade A institutions. So we take a very conservative approach to our cash holdings. We have been fortunate in the last 12 to 18 months with these higher interest rates. That has been helpful for income on that part of our portfolio.
Thank you, Will. And then there were a couple of other questions, but I think merit a longer response. And what I will do is I will personally respond to the shareholders who've sent those questions through. But thank you for sending them through. And as I said, I will personally respond. So that's the end of the Q&A. And that takes us on now to the formal business of the AGM. The full text of each of the resolutions was set out in the notice of the meeting. And the board is recommending that members vote in favour of all the resolutions, which I'm now briefly going to summarise. First resolution is to receive and adopt the company's accounts for the year ended 31st December 2023, together with the strategic report and the report of the directors and auditor. The second resolution is to approve the directors' remuneration report for the year ended 31st of December 23. The third resolution is my own re-election as a director of the company. The fourth is the re-election of Margaret Payne as a director of the company. The fifth is the re-election of Patrick Reeve as a director of the company. The sixth is the election of David Bender as a director of the company. The seventh is the election of Peter Morehouse as a director of the company. The eighth resolution is the appointment of Johnson Carmichael, LLP, as auditor of the company to hold office from the conclusion of the meeting to the conclusion of the next meeting at which the accounts are to be laid. The ninth resolution is to authorise the directors to agree the auditor's remuneration. The 10th is to allow the directors to allot shares. The 11th resolution is a special resolution to give the directors the power to disapply preemption rights. The penultimate resolution, which again is a special resolution, is to authorise the company to make one or more market purchases of ordinary shares in the capital of the company. The final resolution provides the company with the option to provide a 14-day notice period for a general meeting, should this be necessary. The results of the voting, including the proxy votes on each of the resolutions, will be announced after the AGM through a regulatory information service announcement. Additionally, the results will be published on Albion Capital's website as soon as reasonably practicable. I confirm that the voting is now finished, and I now declare the poll closed. In the meantime, I will show on the screen the current proxy votes that have been received by the registrar. As you will note, the proxy votes are comfortably in favour of the proposed resolutions. Thank you. That concludes the business of the AGM. I'd like to thank all the members who joined the AGM by webcast. Thank you again. The board welcomes any feedback you may have, which you can do by sending me an email at aatgchair@capital. So thank you again. I will now formally close the AGM, and on behalf of the board, thank you for joining your company's AGM.